Hello, my name is Dr. George Ragu. I'm coming to you today from AdoptionDoctors.com, the go-to place for domestic and international adoption medical education. Today I'd like to speak to you about international adoption, the risk and the realities. Now, balancing the choice for adoption. There are numerous reasons why parents choose international adoption as a means to complete their family unit. Each case is unique. Each case has its own story, and I've heard over the years many reasons why people choose a particular case, a particular country, a particular culture. Sometimes the culture of the child is what parents want to get involved in because they may have participated in some mission expeditions in that particular country, and they fell in love with the culture and they want to bring a child to the United States. Others have humanitarian reasons. Others feel that the risk of international adoption is less than that for domestic adoptions. And the most unique case that I've ever heard of was of a case where a child was adopted from China that had an amputated right leg. The family was from New York, and their means to adopt this child was to help this child because the family's business was a prosthetic device company. So they felt that they could help this child to obtain a better balance in life. Whereas where she was in China, this child would have been devastated and a handicap for the rest of their life. Good news is that this child is now in college and doing very well. Whatever the reason is, families need to consider international adoptions must be well informed and they must be educated before they accept an international adoption referral. We always have to remember that international adoption is indeed a leap of faith. But with proper education and training, it can become a calculated leap of faith, and you can help a child integrate into a new family and help resolve its medical problems. The problems that we face with international adoption oftentimes is lack of information or misinformation. We don't know whether it's something or nothing. I've seen many medical reports, and the information that we often find is typically minimal, or there's misinformation. Oftentimes there's very little information on the birth mother or the prenatal care status of the mother during the pregnancy. Sometimes we see diagnoses that are made and tests that are performed that really don't make any medical sense. The girth parameters sometimes are there, sometimes they're not. Past medical history, the medical records are often laden with list of medical jargon that are many times rule out diagnoses, but as a parent you don't know what that means. Fortunately, with today's technology, we do see a lot of pictures and we do see a lot of videos, and that helps to alleviate some of the concerns that may be found on the medical reports. And you must remember, the medical reports are only a guidance. It's not an absolute. While all children from international adoptions are considered to be at least of minimal risk, this information, when it's taken to a pediatrician, can help to uncover other more significant problems that may not be visualized on an initial referral source. The analysis of the medical record should never be left to the explanation of people that are facilitating the adoptions. You really do need medical input on this. The medical uncertainties. Now, the reason we have medical uncertainties is because in many of the countries that are putting children up for adoption, their medical technology and their diagnostic capabilities are far less than what we are used to in the United States. Children often have some medical care, but the standards of care that they do receive are far less than that of the general population. And infectious diseases in orphanages where there are many children is basically a way of life. In the orphanages, Many of these orphanages are very, very old buildings. And then we have to worry about environmental conditions. Sometimes there's water and air pollution around the orphanages. There could be lead paint that was used in the industry to paint the walls and the environment around the orphanage. Sometimes there's lead pipes. You could have lead intoxication in children. Alcohol use and cigarette smoking, believe it or not, is a socially acceptable behavior in many, many countries outside the United States. It's sometimes even socially acceptable during pregnancy. Well, we do know that alcohol during pregnancy can have devastating effects on a child. Many countries have a list of cases of children that are up for adoption, and they call these children special needs children. Now, special needs children make you wonder, do they have a medical condition that's not correctable, not manageable? But the list can go from minimal to very severe. So I usually try to go into, is it a medical inconvenience for a parent, or is it a life-altering situation where the child is devastated and handicapped? And while there's a parent for every child, the medical conditions need to be interpreted, because where one family may want to adopt a child as a means to completing their family unit, they may not be ready to handle a child with severe complex medical needs. Some of these medical needs are physical disabilities and chronic medical conditions. Oftentimes, there are surgical conditions and psychological conditions associated with these children. Surgical conditions being a cleft lip, the need for heart surgery, gastrointestinal problems. Many of these conditions can be easily correctable in the United States, while a cleft lip in the middle of a province somewhere with no doctors around is something that the child would live life forever with a cleft lip. Oftentimes with these children that are special needs, just like before, there's incomplete and accurate medical information on the referral, and sometimes there are many unknowns that we just don't know about a child, and all they say is that the child is healthy. So that's where the pictures and the videos help. Now, I want to give you some examples of what is special needs. Special needs are categorized into the surgical special needs: a cleft lip, a cleft palate, various versions of a need for open heart surgery, imperforated anus. Sometimes you have extra digits or fused digits. These are correctable conditions. Medical conditions would be, it could stem from genetic syndromes to chronic medical conditions as asthma. So the list is pretty long and pretty wide. So we have to tease out what medical problems can be managed in the United States and what problems cannot be managed in the United States by the parents. Psychological conditions, they're also an issue. If you think about it, the child has been in an orphanage growing for a number of years without parents, without siblings. It just creates an overall adoption stress. They could have post-traumatic stress, developmental delays, emotional delays, neglect. So the gamut of these things can cause some psychological concerns. The good news is, in the United States, that once they receive the appropriate services, these children many times do very, very well and excel. Now, we have to be aware about the psychological problems, because many of these children that are adopted, they're having emotional immaturity, and just the physical impact of and the living conditions of the orphanage can have long-term difficulties. The younger the child is, the more these conditions are unknown. The longer that the child stays in an orphanage, the more likely there is an emotional issue as the child gets older. And we have to be very careful when the child is described in a report as healthy, because many of the unknowns are basically unknown. Some of the surgical risks and realities of international adoptions depends on the condition. Like I mentioned earlier in the list, a cleft lip is not a big deal. I've seen many children adopted from China that had a cleft lip. They came to the United States and they got it surgically corrected, and the child is doing well. Imperforated anus, the same thing. Surgically corrected and the child is doing well. Today's medical technology in the United States is fantastic. We can fix things here in the United States with minimally invasive procedures that in other parts of the world these children would just remain as is and forever handicapped. Unfortunately, many of these children, even though it's a surgical condition, it's not usually a one and done, and it will require some medical intervention and some doctor visits over time. But the good news is that most will recover easily. The medical risks and realities of international adoptions are chronic medical conditions that can be managed in the United States with different medications and specialists. A good example of this is HIV infection. I am one of the physicians that grew up in the medical age of HIV infection, and it used to be a severe medical problem when there was no medication. And now day and age, with early medications and treatment and chronic treatment, some are saying that HIV should be considered as a chronic medical condition and people live long and prosperous lives with it. Asthma is another medical condition that is often found on a lot of the reports, easily controlled with inhaled steroids. And hearing loss is another example. Easily correctable with hearing aids or cochlear implants, and it helps the child. Services that in another part of the world this child would not receive for sure. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the psychological risks, the adoption stress that's often associated with children that grew up in orphanages, the developmental delays, the emotional delays, poor school performance from lack of schooling. These things can be dealt with when they arrive in the United States, and these children often do very well. Now, some of my final thoughts on adoption medicals. There's a child for every parent, and there's a family for every child. But not all medical conditions fit well with every family. We have to determine what is the parent's goal. Do they just want to complete? Do they want to help? Do they want to give back and save a child? The good news is many of the children that we see have some conditions. We deal with it, and they often get resolved once they arrive home. The surgical conditions basically are life-saving to these children and giving them another chance at life. But parents need to be prepared for what they're getting themselves into, because if you're looking to have an international adoption of a totally healthy child, and then you have to deal with open heart surgery, that may not be for you. Or if you have a positive HIV case and you have lifelong medical treatments. Again, my name is Dr. George Orogu from AdoptionDoctors.com, the go-to place for domestic and international adoption medical record reviews. If you ever need your medical record reviewed and evaluated, feel free to reach out to me and I can help.